Morning, everybody. Good morning, committee, and it's Wednesday, April 20th. This morning, the very first thing we're gonna try to get out of the way, not really vote it today, but get it so we could vote it, is 709.
Okay.
And that's the Miscellaneous Ag Bill that we got from the Agency of Ag. And we've been through that a couple of times with Michael O'Grady. And I think the issue that we might want to talk about adding to that bill, if we're in agreement, we've had a request from the St. Albans senators to add some language on that would allow the airport in Highgate, Swanton Airport, to be able to, they're going to move the farm field days from that property to a different property. I believe that there was $50,000 in the transportation bill or in the budget to help with that cost of movement. And that land cannot be used really for growing agricultural crops because of airport, national airport rules and regulations. And the senators would like to be able to have their development, Franklin County Development Agency, be able to promote that for land for industrial or commercial purposes without having to pay an ag mitigation fee, which you can't use it for ag anyhow because of the federal laws. So I think Corey has the language for that.
Have we seen the language? Yeah, I mean, I'm open to the idea. I don't know. I want to know how to propose it.
Yes, and he should have that language when he gets here. So we'll probably have to take it back up and go through that language again to make sure everybody's happy with it. And I'd like to get that bill in the final proposal so Chris can vote on it, because you're going to be gone. I got to be away.
Oh, that's right.
Thursday and Friday.
Yeah.
So I don't care about turning it in until Tuesday, until Friday. But I'd like to get it voted while Chris is still here.
You're here this Thursday and Friday though, right?
No. I'm gone tomorrow.
Oh,
Friday.
So today.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate that. I also, I could call in sort of 9 o'clock tomorrow. We're not hitting the road till like 9:30. So if you really wanted me for 10 minutes tomorrow morning, I could do that. That made things easier.
could you
Well,
vote though on the phone?
Yeah,
You can?
can in committee, yeah.
You could holler it down. Yeah, I think I heard you, Chris. No, I'd like to have it so you could vote on it and
Yeah, if we can do that, if we can pull that off, great. But
yeah. So we may leave that for now and come back to it later when Corey gets here, because we got to see that language
Yeah.
again.
And I mean, I think I'm open to it, and I know he's had language that was about that airport and more broad, and I'd like to understand what his
Yeah, I think
language.
he's pared it back to just that airport.
Well, yeah, I mean.
I just think it's hard, if we step into a more blanket statement, who knows what we're really doing, and that gets,
Yeah,
then we're.
If you did that, the bill would end up going to natural resources if we did that.
Well, I would expect the smart people have got to see it. Yeah, it helps, but anyway, so we'll try to pick that up later this morning.
the rest of it though, we've already pretty much seen it a
Yeah. I
couple,
mean,
3 times.
Yeah,
I'm fine
Just a
with
little
it.
something
the things
there
that they want to do from the
Yeah.
agency. Yeah, and there wasn't anything else that anybody had thought about that they wanted to
Well,
Not to add, no,
add on, no?
yeah, I was
It's
just
all-
skimming through it, there's the mosquito thing in there that you were,
yeah, I gave up on that.
yeah, I mean, that's sort of how I feel about
All the larvicizing.
Well, yeah, I still want to see it out of there, but I know I'm a lone voice in the wilderness on that, so, in this committee at
Right.
least, right? You're not, are you willing to
it. I
let
mean,
that go?
what we heard was that it wasn't a change actually, that it was just,
Well, it's a change. If you live in that district, you won't get as much money.
well, they're not getting it already, they're putting their own money to the insecticide.
Well, I thought there was a financial impact though to the district, mosquito district.
It sort of changes what they can pay for with state.
And they use it's larviciding and what's the other word? They use.
Insecticide and larvicide.
And, yeah, we had the rep from down there come.
Yeah, Butch Shaw.
Butch and,
So are you still where you were?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's better for us to be more and more discreet with these applications. And I'm not as concerned because it's not actually forcing them to change
All right.
their practice.
yeah.
Because if you were, I'd love to see it out of there. But it wasn't a sword upon which I wanted to throw my body.
But that's, it. I think the only
Yeah, it was.
issue that
Yeah,
we
for me
really
it was.
had was that
Yeah.
bill. So, we did, Chris did send that bill to us, like
Yeah,
yesterday.
466.
And, Michael can't really come until, later.
Okay.
Today, this morning. And I read through the bill, 466, which you guys have copies of.
Yeah.
And it looks to me like the bulk of the language is new language.
Mhm.
Everything that's underlined is supposed to be new.
Right.
So, and it also, if you read the language that's not underlined, it is pretty short and pretty, not much to it. And so what somebody has done, and I don't know who, and I tried to get that out of the chair of the committee, who proposed this? Where did it come from? And the conversation went on for 15 minutes about where it came from.
Mhm.
And they never said, you haven't answered the question.
There was a study, there was a task force, right? That met.
Yeah,
and Ryan was part of it.
and I guess I asked him who was on that. And that Ryan was the only one that had anything on there to deal with that. So anyway, so we get this thing put before us, and Chris's big push in Pro Tem's office was, well, are you guys just gonna kill the bill? I said, well, I don't know. I said, I haven't talked to the committee. We decide as a committee what we're gonna do, not, I don't make any good decisions. I don't make-
They know we're just your
I
puppets.
don't make many decisions on my own. Well, he said, I want your guarantee that you'll get the bill out. I said, well, that's a pretty simple answer. If you really need an answer, I said, sure, I'll get the bill out. And well, what form's it gonna be in? I said, well, there's 10 different ways you can get a bill out of the committee. You look kind of like, what do you mean 10 different ways? I said, well, I've never had a problem getting a bill out of the committee, especially when I chaired it. So I said, well, I'd like to get it out in a favorable way. If we have enough days to fix it, so it makes sense, we'll get it out in a favorable way. Well, what if you can't do that? I said, well, there's other ways. I just told you there's 10 other ways. Maybe we'll have a 5-zip adverse vote to get it out of committee. I said, but yeah, I think you only need 3 votes to get it adverse out of my house. Well, anyways, I got him all confused. But I told Becca that we'd do our best to get the bill out in some form by the end of the week. And so I wanted to get your take on what you think we might be able to do to get it in a form so our small veggie producers can deal with their reporting without causing them a lot of grief and spending a lot of money on meters and things of that nature.
The meters are out, right?
Yeah.
No, you read through, they're still in there.
So I'm trying to pair their amendment
Toward
to
the
the
end,
language.
I
Okay.
thought. But anyways, and I didn't know if what you guys would think about a reporting on a voluntary basis to see what we would get back. Keep track of the water they're doing and report back in some fashion. But I want it to come back to us and back to the legislature. And then we got to figure out how to get them to tell us a little bit about how much water they're using, because it is important to, I think, maybe know. If we're using 1 million gallons a day, but we aren't using it and wasting it. It's going back through the system, and as far as I know, water still runs downhill. So it's going to circulate through the farm and land and back to the watershed and ground soils and you aren't going to have healthy soils without water. Just no way. But anyway.
So, yeah, so the amendment is not, I'm trying to piece it together. I wish it was just a strike all, but
fun, isn't it?
But it does seem to me to not require a meter
No, I read that for
Uh,
meters.
well, it shall provide meter data or measured data by a technically
Right.
appropriate method, but
Yeah.
that's for the bigger ones.
Yeah, but it's
Yeah,
still
no,
in
I-
there.
Well, all right, but it's not, you will have a meter. I agree. The bigger ones, they're potentially,
That's snowmaking.
well, I think they're totally exempted.
Well, they have a
What,
separate.
did we get Michael on this ever or what?
Yeah, he's coming later to this.
There's,
We have Brian with us. He was on the task force then,
yeah, supported that.
promoted that, I think. Right?
Thanks, Bobby. So to me, there's two issues here, maybe more than two, at least two. There's the threshold. And then there's the reporting requirements. And I gotta say, I haven't heard from one farmer in my area that likes anything about this bill. And most of it has to do with those two issues. 5,000 is just,
That's right.
we had somebody gave us a visual image, or maybe it was just me, but if you took the table and took maybe 14 inches of the thing and then filled the room at 14 inches, that's 5,000 gallons.
Yeah.
So that's, you could do that in 5 seconds.
15-minute drip line. Is
Yeah.
what I heard.
Yeah, so I've talked, and these aren't the typical farmers I normally hear from. I usually hear a lot from my dairy folks, but these are.
Yeah,
my
I haven't heard
veg-
anything
these are
from
my-
dairy.
These are my vegetable farmers.
Yeah.
These are my small farmers. These are the ones that are really opposed to this. I mean, my preference, I get, you don't always get your way, just stick this thing back on that wall and read it its last rites, but,
You missed the intro.
You missed the first 20 minutes.
Yeah.
So you don't get to vote on that. So you better tell us.
I had to give my seatmate a ride to the.
I told them,
Yeah, but we didn't believe it.
and I will say, I'm with you 100% on that feeling.
Yeah.
But I don't think that's the way the process is going.
No, I get that, but I think make that very clear to the chair of natural resources and pro tem that a good slice of your committee would rather see this thing die. So whatever we get to is the compromise. I don't want to compromise from where we're going.
Well, we only got one other issue that we got to form a compromise on.
Yeah.
And I don't know if any of you thought of what the second part of the compromise is gonna be.
Soils,
Uh,
airport soils.
no, we gave up on that. No, whatever we bought out of here,
Conference.
right, we gotta have, if our compromise holds up, then we need two people on that conference committee from this room.
Well, that,
Not two from down the hall and one from here, because you're getting sandbagged.
what did Carolyn say? I mean, she needs to do a little work on her side, seems like.
What's she gonna do?
Well,
Boys,
she
So
can-
you left, yeah.
I understand that, but it's gonna go back to them. Part of what you're saying is,
High up the next floor, up Amy, it's gonna go back.
I understand all that, but basically Carolyn, it's surprising that they didn't assert themselves when it came through. And I'm saying it's not actually too late for her to assert herself and help us in a conference dynamic. So that, but anyway,
But that's gonna be.
the other thing,
Go ahead.
I think there's the amounts, there's the headache that we're entertaining for these farmers. These are people you don't hear from because dairy, as I understand it, has to water all year round. So they have wells, right? So they're not,
Or ponds, yeah.
yeah. And so, so it's the berry and vegetables. But on page 10, you see they're setting up a permit program.
Yeah,
And I think that might be more of the heart of the concern. I mean, the rest is a hassle. Then there's this, which
Exactly. That
I mean,
whole
either we're collecting data, we do this all the time these days, I feel like, we collect some data and then we do what the conclusion is without seeing the data. It's really frustrating. So, I don't know, I'm just kind of surprised that the outreach hasn't focused more on page 10 here.
Well,
Program development shall implement a surface water withdrawal permitting program.
see, that shouldn't be determined until we actually know whether we need to institute a permitting process. I mean, it could be, the withdrawals could be very light.
Right.
And fluctuate greatly from one year to the next, depending on our climate. And that shouldn't be decided in this bill. It should come after the findings are submitted and recorded and we look at it. But doesn't this look like mostly new language?
Yeah.
Well, it's because it's all new permit program.
Yeah.
Well, so if we strike the permit program and then we'd have to keep some estimates, we'd have to have that be real, but based on estimates, not meters. You can't very well argue that we shouldn't have a permit program and we should sort of have sloppy data. You know what I mean? I think the argument would be, we're gonna maybe collect data before you entertain a permit. So the data ought to be fairly robust.
Come this year, this off season, and find out if we're using too much. I mean, there shouldn't even be any mention of a permit in here until we figure out whether or not there's an issue.
I agree with that.
I have a very basic question, because we're talking about surface water. And I hate to sound thick about this, but what do we mean by surface water? I mean, when I think of surface water with these withdrawals, I think of taking water from a stream or some body of water. If I'm a farmer and I'm nowhere near, I don't see any rivers near where I live, where I'm farming, I'm just taking water out of the ground, out of a well or whatever it might be. Does that count as surface water?
Wells and springs don't.
Right.
So not
It's
every
struck-
farmer would have to abide by this then, is what I'm getting at.
Well, if they drilled a well or had a spring that they could pump from, they would not register or be in this category. But or pond, farm ponds are not included. But if they pumped out of a stream of any size, and there's 3 or 4 rivers, brooks, streams, they go on for 5 minutes in here about mud puddles. If you pump from any of those, then you're using that surface water.
Because I think what I'm thinking about is the first step might be to actually identify farms that are using surface water.
Yeah,
And that could be the first step of a process, would be to then, in other words, we don't know if a stream is under stress or potential stress in the long run because of withdrawals, too heavy withdrawals of surface water. Why don't we start by identifying those streams or bodies of water that actually might potentially be stressed out in the coming years?
So
identify.
Yeah, just ask the question, do you withdraw from surface water? That's it.
Right,
well,
because then you might
but-
find, then they would find out that, well, there are 3 farms that
We
are
can
withdrawing
then know
surface
the
water
size of
from.
the problem you're looking at in a year or two.
I think they would argue, that's what I've been thinking, yes or no, but if someone's taking 10,000 gallons and some that's taking 150,000 gallons. You know, there has to be some
Well,
way,
volume.
maybe it's
Probably
a,
depends on the
yes.
year.
Well, of course it does, but that's part of the challenge. I'm noticing here that they amended, I didn't see the second page of their amendment, does look at it, it seems to relax the permit and creates a general permit that is, so that's sort of a non-permanent permit. Everyone gets one. Under this chapter, the general permit shall establish a rate of withdrawal volume that only requires notification. It does not require secretary approval. So they have relaxed that, it seems to me. It's not a standard, you know, general permit is, I remember for tree planting or something, they just, everybody has it. It's assumed that you have it because it's a general permit.
But if our idea is to find out how much water we're actually withdrawing, or our farmers are withdrawing, or anybody's withdrawing, shouldn't everybody that withdraws from a stream, river, stream, brook, be reporting?
Yeah.
And I don't think everybody is included, or anybody.
Who's excluded?
Well,
Really, Michael.
Ryan, you want to grab a seat up there, the head of the table?
Be happy to, Senator.
You're the only one in the room that sat on the committee that, did you guys put this bill together?
For the record, Brian Patch, Vermont Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets. It was a back and forth about whether or not the study committee would propose language. The agency wanted to submit a report and let the General Assembly, the legislature, come up with the proposed bill. First, there was a draft bill, and then there wasn't, and the draft bill came back. And as was introduced on both the House and Senate side, it looked generally like the bill that was included as an appendix of the study committee's report that was submitted to the General Assembly. So the genesis of the report wasn't on again, off again, but did come from the study committee that looked at the surface water issue.
You were part of the drafting then of this bill?
As we've seen, there are a number of concerns that the Agency of Agriculture has raised, both from the House side and the Senate side, raised those in the working group. The report and the draft legislation came out, against those recommendations of the agency. Forecasting there would be concern from some of our smallest producers, or really the vast majority of agriculture, from our understanding, where they're currently withdrawing below the de minimis rates, which is allowable under current procedure. And to put this registration reporting on allowed withdrawals was going to be a burden on an already overworked sector. And so trying to be conscious of the metering issues, making sure off-farm ponds were clearly exempted, and that already see the metering issue, but then also, the putting the general permit before the results of a more specific research project. We have good data from both the USDA NASS Ag Census and an irrigation survey, which is on a county by county level reporting, which shows modest distributed withdrawals across the state. But it's not that specific question where a large withdrawal from a small stream could cause an adverse impact to surface water volumes or quantity or quality. But by and large, and as you've heard in testimony, is generally small to modest withdrawals from a relatively large series of watersheds. We tend to have a lot of water relative to the usage up and down particular watersheds. So sorry if I didn't answer your question, but the question was the agency a member? Yes, we were, and we participated in it, but a number of the issues we raised were carried through in the report that was submitted as part of.
Were not carried through.
They were not, thank you, yeah, they were not carried through.
And who was on that committee?
I can pull up a copy and I'll tell you exactly who was on it. It was chaired by Jeff Crocker with the Department of Environmental Conservation. I was as a designee for Secretary Moore, I was the designee for Secretary Tebbets. Senator Bray was a member of the committee. Representative Dolan was a member of the committee, representing the Senate and the House. We find surface water. Should be right on the front page. Senator Christopher Bray, Representative Kerry Dolan, Jeff Nelson from Van Hoos, Rusland, Jason Shappy representing Burlington Country Club, John Groveman, the NRC, David Dean with Trout Unlimited, Evan Fitzgerald, Fitzgerald Environmental Associates, and Sam Markowski, representing Vermont Turks and Markowski Excavation, hemp grower, as part of the agricultural representation on that working group, or sorry, study group.
And was there a vote?
I do not recall a vote as part of this. I don't think we were set up in that way. It's kind of like a study group, and
But yeah, you could develop a bill. Pretty good. I'd like to be on one of those studies.
I imagine you've been on more than one.
Where I wrote the bill.
Yeah, something tells me.
The compact. I did have quite a lot of input, but there was hundreds of meetings. And but anyways, so we only have US, we do have US county reports on water withdrawal.
we have two recent surveys, the USDA Mass Ag Census, which is the ag census everyone knows about, and a more specific irrigation and water management survey that looks at both groundwater withdrawals, which are exempt from reporting and registration requirements in the state of Vermont, and then the surface water withdrawals that was the subject of that study committee. I can go through the results of that high level if you would like, but those were the two most recent data points. But it's not down to the specific watershed level, right? It's county level reporting.
County level is pretty much watershed designated. I mean, in Vermont with little as we are with 14 counties, you pretty much know what watershed goes with which county.
Certainly at the Huck 4 level, I would agree. So just if I may, just some of the baseline information, 627 farms in Vermont, 9% of all farms reported withdrawing either surface or groundwater. 36% of those farms were withdrawing water for surface waters. 3,000 acres of land were reported being irrigated. That's 0.57% of all cropland in the state. And 93% of farms withdrawing from surface or groundwater managed between 1 to 9 acres of irrigated cropland.
How in the world do you run a farm without extracting water from the ground or a river or surface water?
You farm in Vermont, where unfortunately it's cold and steep and rocky by and large, but we have more than sufficient precipitation and most every month of the growing season on average to produce a crop. Field corn, as an example, in Vermont, does not need to be irrigated to reach, marketable
Sure,
crop
but I
yields.
mean, if you're raising animals, you need water. You're clearly
Oh,
like,
that's-
are they? What I'm wondering is, where did we get that report? Because there's just no. What did you say? It was 9%?
So irrigation, not watering of livestock, that would be a different question. So the utilization of the water for irrigating crops, which is generally most water supplies I'm aware of are groundwater based for watering livestock, and that would be exempt, that's currently exempt under state regulation.
Okay.
Did natural resources get those numbers?
I shared this presentation, which I can send a copy to Linda to post to both the House Committee on Natural Resources, Fish and Wildlife, as well as the Senate Committee on Natural Resources and Energy.
Well, yeah, you sent it to them. Did you present it? to them?
Yes, I presented both of these. It takes about a half hour to go through, but the climate change data, the precipitation data, and then the recent-ish water management survey.
When was that done?
It was done in the second week, I believe, of this
What year?
This year,
Oh, so these are all
The report was
recent,
recent, right?
yes.
and how did they collect the data?
This is both the 2017 USDA NAS census data and the irrigation water management survey are like anonymous. You get sent the packet, you fill it out, send it back to USDA. So it's like the census you would fill out in your home, but they mail it to those that are known to be
And
farming.
what was that percentage again of return?
This is our best understanding generally. The 2017 big, the ag census is our best understanding of the total number of operations that are defined as farming in the state. And so there's about 6,000 farms that report as part of that census
In Vermont?
in Vermont,
6,000?
thereabouts. I'm rounding. But that goes down to $1,000, right? Remember, USDA definition of a farm is down to $1,000 worth of sales.
Yeah, well, my garden would do that. So I'm a farmer. I always wanted to be a farmer. That's good news. I'm glad you finally told me. At my age, I missed a lot of years of being a farmer. Chris?
So one of the things, I think it's been handled, but is irrigation ponds that are filled actually by, diverting surface water, or spring or whatever. So are those included now in the latest language to your understanding?
I think there continues to be some ambiguity about what would be in and what would be out from that reporting requirement. My understanding of the amendment from Senate Natural Resources and Energy is that, so the intent is if you have a dug farm pond and you're going to withdraw from it, it's fed by a spring or groundwater, and you're going to irrigate or water livestock, that's not a surface water withdrawal.
No, you're exempt from that.
That would be the intent.
Yeah.
If you draw from a stream to fill it to store it for later, that withdrawal from the stream to that impoundment would count as a surface water withdrawal and be reported. The ambiguity is, as Mr. O'Grady articulates, the water quality standards in connection to surface waters, right? All dams have an overflow or an outlet, otherwise it'll blow out in a rainstorm. And so many of these off-stream constructed farm ponds have an outlet and they connect to water eventually. So are they then, surface waters? DEC, has supported the language which takes out the subject of Vermont water quality standards and has attempted to get to the term constructed off-stream farm ponds and other off-stream impoundments that are used for irrigation or watering of livestock. And so we hope that that means the intent of these dug farm ponds that are historic in nature or recently created, but they're constructed, they're not damming up the surface water, that you can withdraw from that and it's not a surface water withdrawal, you don't have to report it. That is what we hope that amendment language means.
Well,
in that
could
bill.
it be written clear to make sure that it means what it says? Because I read this bill earlier today and I had a little trouble understanding what it really means. It sounds like a lawyer wrote it that was writing it to confuse people, but yeah, it got the point across of what a little bit of what they were trying to attempt to do. But I guess we need a Grady to.
I think Mr. Grady can provide some good commentary on what this means.
Well, I don't care what he thinks it means. I want to be able to read it as a layperson and know what it means. You can't call your lawyer if you're growing berries or whatever. Wow, we just got this new law in the books. Could you read it for me and tell me what you understand it to mean? Well, yeah, for $100, I'll read it for you. And a normal person, I'd be able to read this stuff and understand what it says. I mean, you don't even understand it.
I'm not an attorney.
Well, no, but you've been to school forever and played with this stuff for years, and you're having a question mark. So where the hell does that leave a simple guy like myself?
I agree. Plain, clear language is always useful for current interpretation and future interpretation. And whether it's ensuring that these constructed off-stream farm ponds, I think that's what it says. DEC thinks that's what it means, and so we're in agreement there, the two of us. Ensuring that the clear. So Senator Pearson, the question you raised about the exemption, the general permit allowance. As I read that section in the amendment, it's a general permit for municipal, state or municipal infrastructure projects.
Yeah.
Right. So that's a very narrow general permit that would be issued, and it excludes a whole bunch of other uses.
So that brings up a question I have is we've only heard from, and maybe it's because of this committee, we've only heard from basically berry farmers, veggie farmers. We know people use surface water for snowmaking. That's already handled.
That's
Basically,
a whole separate
Yeah, they
section.
got a
of
permit.
they were already permitted.
They're not permitted. There's a rule that governs them. They're not issued a permit.
Okay, they're
Oh.
already regulated by the rule. Is that fair?
I would ask Mr. O'Grady for the specifics, but that's my understanding.
Then we have golf courses,
Right.
right? They're another big factor here, I'm assuming. Are they already, I mean, what I'm trying to understand is who does this impact besides the berry growers? That we, and part of that is we don't have the data, but we have some understanding, surely. What do you think?
Sure. So in the presentation, the last comprehensive reporting of groundwater and surface water usage was 2005. US Geologic Survey and DEC put this out. It could stand to use some updating because the largest user of surface water at that time was Vermont Yankee, right? And that is no longer online.
We charge them mightily for that, right?
Right. And so, but if you leave that to the side and you focus on the other estimated or reported surface water uses, 52% is public water supplies. That currently has a rule that governs that, administered by ANR, DEC. Snowmaking is there. So public water supplies were reported to be 52%. Snowmaking was 12%. There's already a rule there. Fish hatcheries use another 20%. So those are generally administered by ANR. So that's about 84% of the reported surface water uses are known to ANR. So that leaves an estimated 10% for commercial and industrial uses, and then 6% for agriculture. And so when we look at the other users in the state, I don't know who else to point to other than as the Vermont general contractors shared, for road projects as required for dust, prevention control. Learned about that. I did. And then, the golf courses were a member and they do irrigation. So that, from my vantage point, the only other people I've heard from are farmers, by and large, using that for watering livestock and irrigating crops. And so it is what does this bill get at? It very much is heavily focused on agriculture, I think, because of many of the other uses I'm aware of are already either known or under a rule at ANR.
But of the total 6% is ag.
From the 2005 report from USGS and DEC, the figures that they use there, when you use the 2017 and 18 data, it's much lower in total millions of gallons, but drawn based on the recent survey data compared to the 2005 figures. But those are older.
Well, we know how much water a cow drinks a day. And we know that we have many thousand fewer cows today. I think it's like 20,000 less cows.
They're producing the same amount of milk, so they're probably drinking more.
a lot more.
Well, it doesn't really go to,
I mean, yeah, huh?
I thought we were under the understanding that this is not a big impact on livestock.
It doesn't, because they have drilled wells.
Yeah.
But
Because they gotta water them in winter.
The veggie and fruit guys have probably picked up some since '05. But the dairy guys, what they're down, they might draw from the organic guys that pasture.
Yeah.
They might draw from the
their
brook
water
and
basin.
to fill the tank, but I'm sure they all have floaters on those tanks so that when the float comes up, it shuts the water off and
That'd
but
be a relatively tiny amount.
yeah. I got, hey, Sam, are you on there?
I am. How are you, Senator Starr?
Good to see you.
Good to see all of you.
Committee?
I am. Glad to be here.
Did you have some comments on this or is that?
I did.
Yeah. And
Thank you.
Jackie Folsom's on the screen as well, Sam. Hey. Yeah.
Okay. So,
Well, welcome and good to see you again.
likewise, it's nice to see all of you, and thank you for allowing me a few minutes to testify here, offer a few comments. For the record, Sam Lincoln from Randolph Center. My family and I operate Lincoln Farm and Lincoln Farm Timber Harvesting, which is my logging operation and my forestry background, where many of you have heard from me before. We grow former dairy farm and now a cash crop farm here, and in late 2000s we started irrigating through drip irrigation on crops here through overflow spring water, and as we entered into the berry business, we started drawing water out of the middle branch of the White River to have enough capacity to freeze protect strawberries in the springtime when they're blossoming. And then we've also seen a lot of benefit in irrigating our sweet corn crop and our winter squash and things like that as well. We're certainly seeing some times where we need a couple of weeks extra water in the late summer. So my comments on the bill, to be as concise as possible. And I also want to say that I don't represent any organization or any views. I've been in touch with a lot of farmers and different folks about this bill, but my comments are my own. Primarily, I think it's hard to manage what you can't measure. And I think the idea of some of the goals in H466 that would like to be able to monitor how much surface water is being withdrawn is something that isn't a bad idea. I think that at least understanding what's being withdrawn is something that you can't make any decisions. You don't know what the scope of it is if something isn't understood in its totality. And where the thresholds are on that withdrawal, I think there's been a lot of discussion about that. And I don't think I'm a large enough user or producer to really be the person to weigh in on what those thresholds could or should be. But where my primary concern is how this bill also outlined what I felt to be a pretty significant permitting and regulatory program. And that to me is not justified. It hasn't been demonstrated that there's misuse of water, that there's overuse of water, or there's a problem the way that water is being used. And it jumps right to language such as, the Secretary of A&R would have the ability to restrict based on whether or not it was determined to be an efficient use or low flows of water, things like that. Now, I don't look to use things inefficiently. I don't look to waste water or waste resources or anything on my farm in any which way, but this language jumps so far out ahead of where anybody understands this issue to be that I'm shocked. And I think my comments before I take any questions, I would say that I think a monitoring program would be something that could be accepted in part of the ag community, but I think going right to permitting, I think is I wouldn't support that at all. So I'll leave it there for now. Then take questions if you have any, or discuss it anymore if you'd like.
Brian?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sam, it's great to see you again. Do you have any idea how much you're withdrawing right now?
At max capacity on my farm, we're about 45 gallons a minute, and our pump cycle runs about 2 hours at a whack. I think that works out to about 4,700 gallons if the math is right. I'm on the middle branch of the White River. I'm not sure how many thousands of gallons a minute flow by the farm here, but that's about the extent. We on a really big day, we might irrigate for a 4-hour cycle, but for the most part, we're in a 2-hour cycle. But I'm a small, or in the vegetable, or the horticultural world, we're a relatively small user. So that's just one perspective, one set of data.
No, I appreciate that.
How many acres do you do, Sam?
We have under irrigation, we might have any particular year, we jump around to maybe 5 acres total irrigated between some acres with drip irrigation under plastic, which is a really nice, efficient, low usage type. And we also invested in automated irrigation for our corn crop with systems that will do a couple acres at a time, and automatic systems that go across the field with back and forth on their own and things like that. So no more than 2 or 3 acres at a time.
Chris?
Sam, just help me understand what is it just a hose that sits in the river? Like what does it look like? How do you stop debris and stuff from getting sucked in? Just paint the picture for me. So I've not seen this in person.
Sure. So we have a pump at the edge of the river with a long suction pipe that we have just a float on it to keep it off the bottom of the river. It has a screen on the end to keep debris from coming in, which initially could damage and wear the pump. We try to screen out anything that's probably under 1/8 inch in diameter for any sediment in the river. We have, and then it goes into pipes that we can tap into around the farm. We have 3 backflow preventers on the system. We do use a fertilizer injector. So one way that this has really helped our farm is if we have crops that are suffering sometimes from too much rain or not enough rain, but sometimes like a foliar feeding of a nitrogen will essentially we inject it in the irrigation water and it waters over the leaves of the plant. And an incredible response to those crops through some of the ways we can do it. And it's relatively low cost. Our investment in this is paid back very quickly, and it hasn't been an enormous amount of money for us to do that.
And is it just a little like a generator, just one unit that's attached to the pump?
It's a 9-horse Honda pump. So in that, like I said, I can pump that water, that 4,700 gallons of water for a gallon of gas. So it's pretty low intensity in terms of energy use. We used to do a lot of it through when I was doing spring overflow water. I could irrigate 2 acres of vegetables on drip irrigation, and with a pump a quarter the size of that one, and we could do a few hours. So it's a really low cost and effective investment that we can make in growing food crops.
And you're floating it. I like that, because I was wondering if you were disturbing the bottom, but that's how you protect the riverbed and your own equipment. Okay, thanks.
Yep.
Sam, what do you own the land right up to the river?
I do.
Yeah, you ever dug a spring on your land, say 50 feet from the river and hit
I have not.
water? No.
I have not. So.
But what I was wondering is if you could either drill a well, close to the river and getting water out of it or not, do you know if there's any possibility to that?
You mean to essentially replace the source of the water from river water to groundwater? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
I have not investigated that. I know that my spring overflow only provided about 2,000 gallons a day because we used to let it run into a tank and then pump out of that, and it wasn't. So that was my rough way of measuring that. But we outgrew that. And like I said, we're using about the 4,700 to 9,000 gallons a day now. So I don't know, in terms of like the overhead of drilling a well and then the electricity and things like that, I don't know what the overhead cost would be on that to switch over.
Well,
You gotta get a permit to drill a well, don't you?
yeah, you'd have to get a permit to drill a well, plus you don't want to use that electricity to run a pump. We're gonna need all that to run our electric cars. So, have you got an electric tractor yet?
No, hoping for an electric feller buncher someday. So, but the battery pack will be a little much to carry into the woods, I think, right now. But I think, we've in terms of the scope, I've thought of, it would be great to go to solar because this is at a half mile away from the farmstead where the pump sits. So there's no power there. But if I had the ability to put in, solar and have electricity there, I could, go to a monitoring system that reported to my cell phone, things like that. So going electric interests me in some ways, but I don't know about drilling a well. I've already made the investment in what I have. So that I don't know if I'm for the extraordinarily small amount of water that I'm taking out of the river each day, the infrastructure of a well, I'm not sure would pay back. I have good 2 springs that feed my house now. So
Yeah. Chris?
Sam, just to try to summarize what I hear you saying, because I think I'm thinking similarly, is we should have some recording. We should understand the universe, and it's premature to talk about permits.
I think so. I think understanding what the scope is, what the usage is on a watershed by watershed basis is I'm a numbers cruncher guy. Like I said, you can't manage what you can't measure, but jumping right to permitting would be extraordinarily premature in my eyes.
Thanks.
Yeah, and we did hear from Ryan Patch that we do have, the USDA does do surveys on water usages by the county. They did one just last year. And do you think that should be a mandatory thing, or do you think people would send in the results if we had it voluntary?
I think with some education, some outreach, I think people would do it voluntarily. I hope they would. But I think, moving beyond hope to a plan for outreach and understanding what people do. I don't report to the USDA. I don't participate in the USDA crop programs or anything like that. So not that I'm aware that I'm a mandated reporter. But I think in light of what's gone on here, understanding some outreach would hopefully generate a voluntary program. I know I talked to the farmer in New Hampshire, and over there, he had said they've reported for years, and I think it was mainly, he felt like it was establishing a baseline of usage on his horticultural farm for the future. If there ever was any need for any way to step up how this was handled, that he's got a baseline of what he's used for water for decades, I believe, on his farm. And other than that, he just said, I think he reports quarterly. So something like that, I think, establishes a baseline, and I think it would behoove, users, agricultural producers to do something like that. If something changed in the future.
Yeah, where was that guy located that you just told us about?
On the Connecticut River.
Connecticut River in New Hampshire?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Is theirs mandatory reporting or voluntary reporting?
You know, I can't remember to say for certain. I don't recall for certain.
And what about the gallonage? If we were gonna have people report, what would the minimum amount be that they would report on?
I'm not sure.
Right now, Sam, there's 10,000 gallons a day in the bill.
That's
And I don't know if that's high enough, low enough, or, you know, I don't know where that number came from, other than it was 5,000 and the committee bumped it to 10.
right. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I've had conversations with other producers, but I mean, I think in terms of if you're simply reporting, and I guess it matters in what way you're reporting numbers. Are you going to do what I do and take your pumps gallons per minute with a certain horsepower, powering it and make it, you know, keep a log of how many hours you're running it, or make an estimate of how many hours you ran it a month or a season versus another method? I think that all matters. For somebody like me at the usage I'm at, I would have no issue with reporting you know, the 10,000 gallon threshold. I think I would be, just to be clear, I think I would be probably just under that, except for a few times in the year. But I think you may want some input from other producers on that, or the agency, or anybody, Jackie, anybody else too. So.
Yeah. Other questions? Thanks, Sam. And yeah, you can stay on and listen if you'd like.
I will. Thank you.
Yeah, and Jackie, did you want to report from Farm Bureau?
Sure, thank you. And Jackie Folsom, Legislative Director from the Vermont Farm Bureau. And also in response to Senator Polina's question of what is surface water, in the original bill, it was written as meaning all rivers, streams, creeks, brooks, reservoirs, ponds, lakes, and all bodies of surface waters. They did remove springs. They excluded groundwater, artificial water bodies, treatment ponds, and constructed ponds or other impoundments that are used for irrigation or watering of livestock. But I know there was a question about dairy, and I know you folks probably have not been hearing from the dairy industry, because we've been really sending out action alerts to the vegetable and berry growers and working with them. But it does say that there is language in here that does say withdrawals for irrigation or watering of livestock of more than 10,000 gallons. And one of the issues that was brought to my attention by one of the dairy co-ops was we have wells and springs that go dry. You know, we've had that happen before. So if that does not necessarily exclude the dairy farmers. It's not a lot of them, but one more thing for them to think of, and it certainly would include anybody who's watering livestock. I think that I've been watching. I'm very grateful on behalf of the agriculturalists that the Senate Ag Committee has taken up this bill, because I think there was a lot of folks who were not listened to in other committees. And in fact, Justin Rich has been in your committee, and he was in Senate Natural Resources several times. He talked a lot about why are we worrying about what I take, as opposed to why aren't we worrying about what the watersheds can give? And I thought it was a very interesting comment. It's not about more water out of smaller watersheds or small amounts out of large watersheds. It's let's do this based on the watersheds and not the farmers themselves. The last thing that I will say, and I did want to back up and say one more thing. And when Justin was in that committee talking about how much water he used, and I think Senator Collmore used his reference as far as the 14 inches in the table.
Yep.
One of the senators in there actually asked Justin how much he paid to use the water. And Justin was taken aback a bit because even though groundwater is a public trust of the state of Vermont, that happened many, many years ago. That issue has never been broached to a farmer, as far as I know. And Justin and I talked about it a little bit after, and my response would have been, well, you folks eat, right? I mean, that's how we grow local food. That water is necessary to the farmers in this state. And I just thought it was not a polite question. The last thing I'd like to say, that in this draft that you have a 4.1 at the very end, implementation and rulemaking. And I think this was added because there were so many farmers that were not heard from during the study committee that happened last year. So the Secretary of A&R is supposed to have public input and outreach prior to formal rulemaking. Well, so that's 2 steps that the farmers have to deal with, and rulemaking occurs in the summer, usually after the legislature's out. It does not give time for these farmers to go in and participate, particularly not if we go off the Zoom rendition of meetings. And it worries me a great deal that even though there is wording in here that says A&R should do public outreach and public input prior to rulemaking, that still means that during their busiest time of year, these farmers are going to have to stop what they're doing and go in and give testimony, and then perhaps give it again after rulemaking starts, and then perhaps give it again during LCAR. So this is a long, drawn out process that farmers are really being proactive right now and letting you folks in the Senate understand their concerns. And I really appreciate the Ag Committee taking these up right now, because the farmers are not going to have time to do this during the summer. I totally agree with Sam in that just because of the way the discussion seemed to be going in Senate Natural Resources, it was, let's get a database, and Farm Bureau is not against that, although it sounds like we have a pretty robust one county-wise from USDA. But the next piece is permitting, and the next piece is, well, how much are we going to charge you for taking that water out? And even though that might be a 10-year process, that's what we worry about. And we're concerned about this bill. I know that Justin Rich has been in your committee and would be willing probably to come back in and give more testimony. I think he has suggestions regarding the amount of gallons per day, and I'm not going to put words in his mouth, but I really appreciate you hearing from farmers and from Farm Bureau on this issue, because it seems to me that there's a lot of misunderstanding going on with the fact that the farmers don't abuse the water they take out. They're very aware of being stewards of the water and the land, and it's important that their voices are heard. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Jackie. Well, if we took Sam at his word, it's hard to manage without knowing. Well, we need to know before we manage, right? So if we got some kind of a reporting system that farmers could do without a major issue, have that report come back to us in the legislature, then we would determine whether we need to manage that water. Once we knew the measurement, we could, if it did need to be managed, why couldn't we set that management up instead of A&R in the legislature, through the legislature? Got any comments on that, Sam?
I do, thank you. I think that any reporting done by watershed, also that as you analyze that data that you collect, if this is how it becomes, that it is reported in context to the flow by the withdrawal source, to give a really important context of how much, what, I think of what I'm doing in a lot of decimal points of 0.0000 something percent of what flows by my farm. And that doesn't mean it's nothing. And it doesn't mean that there isn't a good, always a good, better way to do things in the theory of continuous improvement. But context is important in this discussion. And I think jumping ahead, whether it's the legislature that sets a management style or the ANR's secretary is authorized to do that. I think some of the language that was most concerning to me in this bill was that the DEC, without any other than the rulemaking process, was directed to determine efficient uses of water and restrictions and those kind of things. And there was no explanation of where that came from or why or what that, like examples of this type of irrigation or water usage is better than another, any of that. And that's why I'm completely opposed to any permitting scheme right now as being premature, because there's a lot of things beyond just a permit program in what's written in that language that have an enormous impact on agricultural producers, and I don't think it's been justified or explained or anything like that.
Yeah. Jackie?
And the other thing is, this whole piece has been written on agriculture. If there was a report on agriculture that came back to the two committees that oversee agriculture, then at that point, all the other committees that touch water, having to do with ski areas, golf courses, roads, then you could get a full report of who is using what water and how much is being used for what. I mean, we talk a lot about the phosphorus flow into the lake, and here's the percentage of agriculture, and here's the percentage of community wastewater treatment plants. That to me would be much more of value if you had a study, or if you had reporting, you had it come back and you said, okay, let's compare all of this to everybody that's utilizing the state of Vermont's waters, and then go from there. But to just dump this all of a sudden and say, well, we don't know what's happening in agriculture, when clearly there are sources, even though they're not based on individual farms, seems to be, as Sam says, jumping the gun. I don't think folks are as upset about measuring it as they are as upset about not having a voice in the initial discussion.
Who's going to send this? Who's going to send all this information out, and who are they going to send it to? How do they know where all the produce farmers are in Vermont? Sam, I think you said somebody said earlier, oh, maybe it was Ryan, said that we had 627 produce farms. Well, ANR knows where there's 627 produce
I don't
farms.
think the agency of ag knows, so.
So I'm wondering who's gonna send out these notices and how to get their addresses. Sam?
Well, I think the UVM extension helps facilitate the Vermont Vegetable and Berry Growers Association, which is a terrific organization. In addition to Farm Bureau and Rural Vermont, I think the outreach, some collaborative outreach would reach the vast majority of those producers. And in addition to any USDA data, Farm Service Agency or anything like that, I think a mailing list or an email list or anything like that could be developed in relatively short order. I don't just the vegetable and berry growers listserv reaches several hundred of those farmers. I don't know exactly how many, but it's a pretty I believe it's a pretty connected network.
Well, yes, but there's not one thing in the bill that promotes outreach and brings in the organizations. And if, if we do an ag issue, we always get Crime Bureau and Rural Vermont, the Extension Service, the county conservation district. We always get these people involved to do outreach and to get it going from scratch. And there's not one word in this proposed bill that promotes any of that. And if you can't get the president of the Berry Association on board to push it, or Crime Bureau on board to support it, and then you're gonna go ask them, well, you gotta get these notices out. Well, they're gonna tell you to take a hike, I would think. So it's important that, that people are on board with this, and it's gotta be written in a fashion that to make them understand, we don't need to know that every drop of water that we're using today, but 10 years from now, if we don't start monitoring it and the climate change goes in the wrong direction, we may need this water and know where who's pumping what, and so it, for the future use of it, but I don't think the bill in its present form does that. And it needs, I like the idea of getting this out and trying to figure out what we're using for water, but we don't need to write a law to regulate it until we know how much we're using.
And I think that Farm Bureau would have a real hard time, and I think any of the organizations that were mentioned would have a really hard time saying to our members, oh, we'd like you to send in this idea of how much water you're using, as long as the permitting piece was still in there, because I think we'd have a hard time speaking out of both sides of our mouths on that. We certainly don't want to promote that. We want the farmers to supply information that will then be used to require permitting down the road. So if that piece was removed, it would probably be easier for all of us to do outreach and promotion, and also the pre-rulemaking piece, which is not going to help any of us for anything.
Yeah, Chris?
I'm curious, I'm cooking up some ideas, but does anyone have an idea? Sam mentioned, the context of what river you're extracting from is important. Does anybody have any idea if ANR is already measuring sort of flow, and is that data already collected? Because it doesn't seem fair to me to burden the farmer on that piece. That should be somebody else. The farmer supplements the knowledge.
Sam?
Thank you. Yes, there are the U.S. Geological Service, if I've got USGS has the river flow meters, and there's historical data and real-time flow meters on many rivers in Vermont. So that is readily available, and information. And I was just thinking in general, whoever the aggregator of the information is, that, let's say I report, I'm on the middle branch of the White River. These months I use this, they would have at least a window of time in which they knew what the average flow was on the stream past my farm during that withdrawal. And I think that's where that context could come from. It's already collected and stored data. I believe it's been some time since I looked at that. If I might jump back real quick to Jackie's point, Senator Starr's point, I think that's a real big piece of this is that the stakeholders were not valued enough to be included in the original language as drafted in this, and that again is concerning. I've made a lot of decisions. My family's made a lot of decisions on this farm. We've spent money that was our own, not grant money, not anything, our own money to do improvements here. We sold a dam that was downriver from our farm to a conservation group that was been removed. Different things to improve water quality, a lot of practices done here. And I don't say very often, but we've also received awards for that, for conservation efforts on our farm. But I think it's important that any future discussions around this, whether it's regulatory or monitoring or any of that, that the users, the stakeholders are at the table. We are producing food for the citizens of Vermont and beyond, and we're investing a lot of money and time and doing a good job. And I appreciate the tenor of this committee in thinking of that as well. I think that's the committee process, bringing a lot of very diverse and well seasoned people around the table to solve a problem, to me is great. And I've always appreciated your work on that, and look forward to doing that. If there's a problem here, if 5 years from now, if it's determined there's a problem here, look forward to being at the table saying, what can we do? How do we do this well?
Yeah. Thank you, Sam. Jackie?
Yeah, great words, Sam. I echo them. But I also would like to say, I think Justin Rich, he's talked about the de minimis water withdrawal that is, and I think that's what Sam is referencing. There are minimum amounts that you can withdraw from the watersheds, and Justin can give you a better idea of it. He's tried to explain it to me, but since I'm dairy, not Barry. So it's a little confusing for me to understand it, but he does a very good job of talking about the de minimis water withdrawal that's already in effect on the in the watersheds in the state of Vermont. And I think Ryan has talked about that too, to some degree. So there already are places where they measure the water and you have a minimal amount that you're allowed to take out. And so maybe if you have time, that would be a chance to hear about that. And I'm sure Justin would be willing to come back in and talk with you about that. He's really got a handle on all of this water stuff.
Justin, you're talking about, I talked to him this morning. He's been in, we've had him on already.
Yeah.
And he told me he's ready when we need him.
Well, because we should get Justin on, because we've had him in, but we haven't had him in and talked about, your and our ideas on how to fix this thing so we could get it back out of here in a positive way. And I mean, it sounds to me like if we went in the direction we've been talking, you folks could support this, but I'd like to hear Justin's point of view and see where he's coming from. I know we heard from Sam Burr, who used to be our draft person many years ago, and he and his wife farm up toward Burlington some way, and they're very concerned about the bill and the way it was put together and what was required, and so he's gonna come on sometime this morning when he gets some service, line service,
Who is that?
Sandberg.
Oh, I haven't heard.
Did you get Justin?
I just emailed him to see if he could join us.
So, Brian?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I feel kind of like I'm in a kayak with one oar and I'm just paddling around in a circle here. I still am not convinced, with all due respect to Senator Pearson, and I know, and I understand his point about being blind on the data. We're already measuring in some fashion the way Sam mentioned, the flow meters that are already in existence on some of our lakes, rivers, whatever. Ryan has mentioned that the USDA has already done a lot of work with the water, or they call it county, but again, I'm going to refer to it more as a watershed. So to me, if there were alarming signals being sent by any of the data that we've already been collecting, that would be a basis to say, hey, you know what, we might have a problem here. Let's take a look at getting some more measurements. So I'm still there, and I guess I'll stay there, paddling around my little circle here. But the other thing I was going to ask Jackie, because I assume you were in the Senate Natural Committee when they came up with the 10,000 gallon figure. And I'm wondering, so it's gone from 5 to 10. How did they arrive at that? Who did they hear from that said, you know what, the number should be 10,000? Or did they just say, let's double the 5 and we'll be happy with the 10,000? I don't know how they arrived at that 10,000 number. I'm also wondering, and we have neighboring states that have much higher thresholds from what I'm told. I'm trying to, I guess, get to a point, Mr. Chair, where I can support going forward with this, but I'm still leaning back and just wondering and scratching my head saying, what's the problem that we're trying to fix? I don't see it as a problem. With all due respect to Chris, okay, I'm not against getting data either, but I'm trying to find a way for the farmers to not be burdened with another example of the state sticking its nose in when it really doesn't need to, in my view, and make it as easy and painless and simple as we possibly can for them, and come up with a number that makes sense. And much of the rest of this bill, in terms of the permitting and all that, I think we can, I just sort of see that go back somewhere else, but not in this bill. So there's where I am. So Jackie, how did they come up with the 10,000? You remember that, or can you provide us any information?
I think probably when you get Justin Rich in here, he can tell you, he was in there and I believe he was advocating for 50,000 and their compromise was 10,000. I believe that's how it occurred. The challenges that the farmers had going in there into Senate Natural Resources was they set aside an hour and a half one day and they were 45 minutes late coming off the floor. And the first person that they heard from was someone from the Conservation Law Foundation who had been on the, I believe he'd been on the study committee. And he did almost 45 minutes on how wonderful this was and how necessary it was and all of this. And when they got to they had two farmers sitting in there. One was Justin Rich and one was David Hartshorn from the Valley. And they had 5 minutes left and they were told they only had 5 minutes. So whoever wanted to talk could speak. Justin took a breath because he had all of his testimony ready to go. And he did 5 minutes and the other farmer was told to come back, which he could not and did not. So that left a bad feeling in people's throats. But I believe Justin's the one that suggested the 50,000 gallons based on his knowledge of the irrigation world. And they settled at 10. And I think that's where that happened, but you need to probably check with Justin.
Thank you.
Sam, is that, are we gonna miss a lot of reporting and knowledge if we went that high? Because if you go too high, you aren't gonna have anything to measure, you know? So you can't have it, you know, too low either, but you can't have it so high that nobody's gonna report as a bulk, because then you aren't gonna know if you're using any water or not. So, you know, we've got to, if we get rid of the rulemaking, get rid of all that stuff that's way premature, and we just collect the data to determine how much of our total water maybe we're using, then you can decide if it gets to this level or a certain level, boy, we got to start being careful here. We're going to get very thirsty. But so if you don't start at a certain level, you're going to miss quite a lot of actual gallons that we are utilizing. I don't say used really because it goes back into the system regardless. You aren't wasting the water. It's just refiltering it back through the soil. Should charge for filtering the water. That might be a clause we could throw in. If you would track 10,000 gallons Well, you know, 10,000 is gonna go back all nice and clean after, well, anyway, Justin, Chris, you wanna run through what you were thinking about? with
Yeah,
Justin?
Justin, thanks for joining us. It's maddening to hear of the less than adequate time you've been given in the process so far.
Well, we heard he got used real good. He got cut from a half
Yeah.
hour to 5 minutes.
Yeah.
That was a blessing in disguise.
And for Brian and Bobby, Justin lives in Huntington, and I was unable to help Huntington come back into the Chittenden Staff District. So I have a real soft spot.
I don't think he lifted very hard.
No, that's not, come on, that is not fair. So we've been trying to, chew through this, and I think, we probably are not gonna all agree, but there is some appreciation that we do, people need data. We ought to have, the permitting, it seems premature, but the data seems sort of straightforward to me. We should have data. So, and then we get into this threshold. I'm wondering if we would have, what you think of sort of, hey, if you're extracting, you have to let us know in some kind of yes, no scenario. Then if you're extracting more than 50,000 gallons a day at any point, I don't know how we define that, then we would ask that you provide an estimate, not a metered, but some estimate. So yes, I extract, but it's under 50,000 gallons. And then if you're over 50,000 gallons, some estimate. And then we strike the permit, strike the rules. We make sure that this is compiled, as Sam has suggested, in the context of the overall flow, which we think that data already exists, but try to put it all in one place. And right, and then I don't know where you report to, so it'll probably have to be Ag and A&R or something like that. But does that seem like something you can write your members to and say, hey, they heard us, this is not crazy, this is actually a decent water quality, whatever. Does that seem like we're getting closer?
Thank you again for letting me share my opinion on this. For the record, Justin Rich from Huntington. I think what Senator Pearson just said is a very lucid summary of our concerns and a very workable potential solution. This bill was sold as a data gathering bill. I and most farmers will not argue against the idea of data gathering. Data is how you get information and how you make good management decisions. Sam said earlier, you can't manage what you can't measure. Let's get some numbers out there. The problem we had with this bill is it was tied to a guaranteed permitting scheme, regardless of what the data showed. And that's just problematic from a philosophical standpoint. And I think most of the folks in the room have expressed their agreement that that's maybe not the best way to go. I think if I wrote a letter to all the veg and berry growers, I would get a lot of people saying, that sounds reasonable. If they want to know what we're using, fine. But let's not guarantee that we're going to be seen as a problem that needs management, that needs regulation and permitting. It might turn out we take even less water than people thought. I don't know. Might be more. I don't know. Some people don't know how much water they take. So I can't argue from a philosophical standpoint that it's irrational to want some data on water withdrawals.
Yeah.
I mean, it might turn out that there's 10 farms on a very small brook that we didn't, and then you maybe have to have some scheme there that's very different from what Justin's described as.
But you've got to
next
know
to-
that before you drop the hammer.
The geomorphological processes that make high producing vegetable soils almost guarantee they're along large rivers. So our larger users are going to be on the larger rivers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Small rivers do not have gigantic fields next to them to be irrigated.
No.
I live on one of those, so I can tell you, I wish they were more gigantic, but they're not. They're 1, 2,
Well-
3, 4 acres.
And Pete's Green, up north where I live, I mean, he's got little fields scattered around, but they're in different parts of the, I don't know if it's a Black River or, what part of it, the river it is, or if he even drills wells in some places, but
Pete is in
His
multiple different watersheds, small fields,
Yeah.
and many watersheds.
yeah. Well, do you think the Department of Environmental Conservation knows where all your berry growers are?
I could not say what they know. I do not know. I know there's a lot of very good mapping software out there, so vegetable fields are pretty easy to see from the sky. They don't look like cornfields, unless it's sweet corn, but even then.
Oh, they run in with their drones and satellite. Yeah. It's
Yeah,
a good way to get an
Someone knows.
accurate-
Yeah, someone knows.
Um,
as Maddie Monty said yesterday, NOFA knows where all the organic operations are. Agency of Ag knows where most of the operations of a certain size are. NRCS knows where some are. I mean, any farm which is not on one of those organizations' radar is probably so small as to be not exactly a huge contributor
See,
to whatever issue we're talking about.
a lot of like the Agency of Ag, they won't even give us a printout of the dairy farmers in Vermont. It's pretty confidential stuff that the agencies have. Hey, I wanted to get, Paulina, you haven't been in this discussion much. What do you think about the way we're going?
I think the way we're going sounds really good, actually. I appreciate Chris's laying it out the way he did. I think that it's quite reasonable to ask for data, as Joseph said, and I think that the idea of removing this inevitable permitting process is a good idea as well. I think it goes back to what you were saying about how we'd find out if there were a bunch of farms along a small river, that would be maybe a cause for further examination. But if it's a couple of farms along a big river, that's probably fine and should be left alone. I mean, we need that kind of information to understand what we need to do. So I like the idea. I like the direction we're going in.
Yeah, I think Jackie's good, I think, with that, and Sam, Sam's good. Brian, where are you?
Well,
He's kayaking.
I'm still paddling here.
Well, in a
No,
straight direction.
Yeah, I know. I'm gonna straighten myself out here in a minute. So that was a very thoughtful statement that Chris made moments ago, and I could see myself beginning to turn that direction. I was adamantly against this at one point. I just thought it was completely unnecessary. And many farmers have said it's a solution looking for a problem, and I agree with that. But I'm also starting to go the other way, that maybe some data might be useful, and as long as we collect it in a thoughtful way and don't stick our nose in too deeply, I guess I could support it.
It was also interesting. It was interesting. We got communication from the Senate Natural Resources Committee, I don't know, the other day. And they said, we did take testimony from farmers. And they said, including, and they listed Jackie Folsom, who's obviously not happy with the way they were going. Joseph Dutton was another one they talked about, which clearly was not totally happy with the way they were going. Rural Vermont, which obviously yesterday told us they didn't like the way we were going. And somebody else, I forget who, but they said, we took testimony from farmers. What they didn't say was the farmers they took testimony from didn't like what they were doing.
Right. The other farmer they took testimony from was Charles Gray, who happens to be Lieutenant Governor's brother. And she had been getting an earful about it too. So, and there were farmers that tried to testify that couldn't get into that committee. That he probably didn't share that with you either, because we had a list of about 5 or 6 people that we kept sending in, and we couldn't get them into the committee. So
that Hartshorn was one of them.
Yes.
I know Molly sent Becca a letter yesterday, really upset with the bill, and actually she asked me into the office and talked with her. And I basically said that, told her basically what I had in my mind, which was what Chris presented a few minutes ago, pretty much in the same line. But why, maybe you guys that are on Zoom could check with some of your members on what we're planning or thinking about. And maybe I gotta get Michael O'Grady in here with enough time so he can understand where we want to get with this thing. It turn out to be a strike all to the whole bill, which I think would be easier to put together and explain than this mess that they sent us from Natural Resources. You can't follow it because you're jumping from one page to another page. And so we probably do a strike all amendment to the bill and go back with that. But if you could check with a few of your members to get their opinions, because I don't usually get blindsided on the floor with an issue because we work through it until we can all agree. But please check with your members and we'll go from there. Yeah, Justin.
Yeah, I've spoken with a decent sized group of other growers in the vegetable and berry community and on the board of directors of the organization. And over time, we have realized the biggest concern is the permitting. That was always sort of the problem. And the data collection was just something that led to a problem. If we can divorce those two, it alleviates almost everyone's concerns I've spoken to about potential unintended consequences of this bill. I don't want to assume any sort of disingenuous action by the folks who constructed this bill. I really think they just didn't get our input, and I don't want to claim they were trying to keep us out of the room, but we weren't in the room, and this bill got this far in a way that doesn't reflect our concerns. But if this is just about data collection so that we can actually literally know what's happening, as I said in my first testimony to the Natural Resources Committee, if there's a problem, we want to solve it. We want to be part of the solution. We do not want to just throw our hands up and say, get off my land. That's not where we're at. So something that, striking the permitting, and then we can talk about what the reporting numbers are. That's a very workable solution from most of the people I've talked to in our community. I can't speak for everyone.
Could I ask a question? Who's going to do the data collection? Is that resolved in the bill, or is that something we need to think about, or how do we approach that? And then the other question is, what do you do with the data? It's one thing to say we want to collect data, which I think I agree with what Mr. Dutton's saying, but the question will come up, okay, what are you going to do with the data? So I just don't want to be blindsided with those questions. We should think about those a little bit.
Well, what agency do you guys usually work with, Justin?
Good question.
To the extent to which any vegetable and berry growers interact with state agencies, it's mostly Agency of Ag. But as has been said, Agency of Ag mostly works with dairy farmers because they're 90% of the farmland in the state. So it makes sense. They're focused there.
Well, there's no way you're going to get A&R to relinquish their role over surface water. So
it should come to us.
Well, we're not going to analyze the data in this room.
We can at least get the report.
Well, the results should come to this committee.
Well, I think we lean on O'Grady to help us think that through.
Yeah,
I like that idea.
huh?
I like that idea.
Report it to Corey Perry. Here's his email.
Yeah.
He's a data expert.
Yeah.
Well, I'll
Excel
tell you,
sheets only.
years ago,
You seen the nickel,
we were fooling, in regards to putting together a dairy package. And we actually, the Health Ag Committee, did the survey, sent out the survey, got the survey back and tallied our survey. Andy Christensen spent a whole summer doing that. And,
Oh
and
my God,
that ended up going through the Congress and becoming law. But anyways, what we need to do is work with our draft person and see about putting this together. But we need to get you folks back on with the finished results. And I don't know if we could, you're gonna be around Thursday or Friday. I don't know if it'd be convenient to
might not be bad for us to go this well.
get back Friday. That's what I was thinking. We could, would you guys have time sometime Friday morning to jump back on Zoom, and we could review what we got put together on paper so that we all are looking at the same stuff?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So
I'm looking out the window at snow, so I think I have a little bit of time.
Same here.
Well, we could give you 5 minutes. No, so why don't we shoot for Friday morning? And we don't know if Michael can come yet Friday.
No, he's coming in about 5 minutes,
No,
but Friday morning I'll check.
We should also invite back NOFA and rural Vermont to make sure they're okay with what we're doing.
Sure.
yeah. We'll plan on Friday morning. Linda will send you guys notices with Zoom links. And thanks a lot for your time this morning. Hopefully it will make a difference, and we'll see you Friday morning. And we're gonna have Michael in about 5 minutes. If you wanna jump back on, you're more than welcome to hear that conversation. But we'll take a quick break, guys.
Oh, good. I gotta
Go.
see the man on the horse.
I'm gonna go. I wanted
Yeah.
to say thank you to everybody. Nice to see you and appreciate your work on this.
Nice to see you,
Thank
Sam.
Sam.
Hi, Sam.
So